Hello, and welcome to History as Meditation. Find a place where you can feel at ease, where you can let the weight of the day begin to dissolve. Settle into your bed or your favorite chair and allow your body to grow heavy, comfortable, and still. Gently close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath in, and as you exhale, let go of the noise of the present. Let go of the lists, the worries, the endless stream of information that fills our modern lives. Our world is one of instant convenience, a world where 1,000 flavors from 1,000 places are available to us at any time, a world of refrigerators and sealed packages, and pantries full of plenty. But we are not going to stay here tonight. Together, we are going to let our minds drift backward through the centuries to a time when life was quieter, slower, and profoundly more difficult. A time when the simple act of eating, of finding enough sustenance to see the sun rise one more time, was the central drama of almost every human life. Tonight, we explore the bitter taste of medieval survival. The word bitter here is not just about flavor, it's the bitterness of a harsh wind blowing across a fallow field, the bitterness of scarcity, of a diet that was relentlessly, achingly the same day after day. It is the bitterness of the constant, unending struggle to fill one's belly. Our journey will begin where most stories of the Middle Ages should, with the common person. We will immerse ourselves in the daily life of a peasant family, in the rhythm of their seasons, and the contents of their perpetually simmering pot. From there, we will explore the lives of those who fought and those who ruled, and the strange and fascinating beliefs that shaped their world. But for now, there is nothing for you to do but listen, nothing to do but breathe. Let the details of the past wash over you, a gentle tide pulling you further from the shore of wakefulness. So relax, let your breathing slow, and let us travel back to a time when the taste of survival was often a bitter one. Chapter 1: Daily Life. Immersion. The Peasant's Pottage. Imagine yourself awakening not to an alarm, but to a subtle shift in the darkness. The deep, impenetrable black of a moonless night has softened to a charcoal gray. Outside a small, humble dwelling, the birds have not yet begun their morning song. The air inside this single room is cool and thick with the scent of sleep, of packed earth, and the ghost of last night's fire. This is a peasant's home, in the heart of the 12th century. There are no windows of glass, only small shuttered openings, now tightly closed against the chill. The walls are a rough mixture of woven branches and mud, known as wattle and daub, and the roof above is a thick layer of thatch, home to spiders and mice. In one corner, a family lies together on a single large pallet stuffed with straw. You can hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of children. A man, let us call him Edric, stirs first. His movements are slow, deliberate, ingrained with a weariness that sleep can never fully erase. Every joint aches from a life of hard labor in the field of his Lord. He moves to the center of the room, to the shallow pit that serves as the hearth. The embers from last night's fire are a faint, pulsating orange, a tiny spark of warmth in the gloom. He gently blows on them, coaxing them back to life, adding small, dry twigs until a fragile flame flickers, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough walls. His wife, Ilara, is awake now too. She moves with the same practiced slowness, her life a mirror of his, a constant cycle of chores dictated by the sun and the seasons. Their morning meal is a simple, grim affair. There is no sizzling bacon, no fresh eggs. Breakfast for them is a necessity, not a pleasure. Alara takes a loaf of bread from a wooden chest. It is not a light, airy bread. It is dark, dense, and heavy. It was baked days ago in the communal village oven, and now it is hard. She uses a simple knife to saw off a few rough chunks. This bread is made from rye and barley, the grains they are allowed to keep after the Lord has taken his share of the wheat harvest. It is coarse and a constant reminder of their station. They chew the bread slowly, methodically. It takes effort. To soften it, they dip it into a cup of small beer, a thin, watery ale that is low in alcohol but far safer to drink than the often contaminated water from the local stream or well. This is their breakfast, a piece of stale bread and a sip of weak ale. It is enough to quell the initial pangs of hunger and provide a sliver of energy for the morning's toil. As the family prepares to leave for their work in the fields, Alara's attention turns to the day's main meal. It is a meal that, in a way, never truly ends. Hanging over the hearth from a sturdy iron hook is a large cauldron. This pot is the heart of the family's diet. It is rarely, if ever, fully emptied or scrubbed clean. It is a vessel of perpetual stew. This stew is known as pottage. Into the pot, Alara adds more water and a handful of dried peas and coarsely ground oats to serve as a thickener. Then she adds the vegetables. Just outside their door is a small garden plot, a curtilage, which is her domain. Here she grows the essentials of the pottage. Today, it is a few hardy onions, a couple of leeks, and a thick wedge of cabbage. The vegetables are chopped roughly and added to the pot. There are no potatoes, no tomatoes, no sweet corn or peppers. Those crops are still centuries away, existing in a land across a vast, unknown ocean. The medieval European diet was a world of greens, roots, and onions. She stirs the mixture with a long wooden spoon. The contents are a murky, unappealing gray-green. For flavor, she might add a pinch of salt, a valuable commodity, and perhaps some herbs from her garden, like parsley or sage. The pottage will be left to simmer here, over the slow fire, for the entire day. The smell will slowly fill the small hut, a constant, unchanging aroma of boiling cabbage and wood smoke. It is the scent of survival. And what of meat? Meat was the ultimate luxury, the great divide between the peasant and the lord. The family might own a single pig, which they carefully fatten throughout the year on scraps and forage. The slaughter of that pig in the autumn was a momentous occasion, providing precious fat for cooking and salted meat that, if they were lucky and the salt was good, would last them through the winter. A tiny sliver of this salted bacon might be dropped into the pottage, a savory treasure that would infuse the whole pot with its smoky, salty flavor. But other meat was forbidden. The deer in the Lord's forest, the rabbits in the fields, the fish in the river, all belonged to the Lord. To be caught poaching was to risk brutal punishment, a hand cut off, or even death. And so, for the vast majority of days, the pottage was a simple, meatless stew. Now let us imagine the passage of the seasons, for the peasant's life was governed by them entirely. In the late summer and early autumn, life was at its best. The harvest was in, the garden was full. Fresh beans and greens would fill the pottage, and there might be foraged berries. or wild apples for a rare, sweet treat. This was a time of relative plenty, a brief respite from the gnawing worry of hunger. But then came the winter. The world outside turned cold and gray. The diet turned inward to the stored foods that had to last until the spring. The pottage was now made with dried peas and beans, with wrinkled turnips and cabbage that had been stored in the root cellar. The main source of protein came from barrels of salted fish, usually herring, bought at a local market. The taste of salt was everywhere, a monotonous, biting flavor that lingered for months. The worst time, however, was the late spring. The winter stores would be dwindling, perhaps gone entirely. The new crops were not yet ready to be harvested. This period was known as the Hungry Gap. It was a time of true, desperate hunger. The bread would be made with even less flour, bulked out with ground-up beans or tree bark. The pottage would be thin and watery. It was a time of weakness, of disease, and of profound vulnerability. To survive the Hungry Gap was the great recurring challenge of every peasant's life. As evening falls, imagine Edric and the family returning from the fields. The sun is low, their bodies are heavy with fatigue. They gather around the hearth, the only source of light and warmth. Ilara ladles the pottage into rough wooden bowls. It is thick, warm, and filling. They might eat it with a trencher, a thick slab of day-old bread that serves as an edible plate, soaking up the juices. Once the pottage is gone, they might eat the soaked trencher itself, or give it to the dog, or even to a beggar if one were to pass by. They eat in silence, the only sounds being the scraping of spoons and the crackle of the fire. The taste is bland, familiar. It tastes of cabbage and smoke and earth. It is not joyful, but it is sustenance. Tonight, it is enough. As the fire dies down to embers once more, the family settles back onto their straw pallet. Their bellies are full for now. Their life is a relentless cycle of toil and simple subsistence, a life tied completely to the land they work but do not own. The simple, humble pottage in their bowls was a world away from the lavish, spice-filled dishes served in the great halls of their lords. And yet, even for the powerful, the challenges of getting food from the field to the table were a constant, complex struggle, one that shaped the very fabric of their world. We will leave the peasant family to their rest now, to the deep sleep of the exhausted, their lives governed by a rhythm we can now only imagine. Chapter 2, The King's Great Matter and a Royal Feast. We leave now the quiet, smoky hut of the peasant and travel forward in time and upward in status. We move from the world of the commons to the world of the crown, from a diet of subsistence to a diet of statement. For the powerful, food was never just about survival. It was about power. It was a language, a spectacle, a tool of diplomacy, and a constant performance. Let us settle our story in the early 16th century, in the vibrant, ambitious court of a young King Henry VIII of England. Picture a man not as the bloated, tyrannical figure of his later years, but as a handsome and athletic Renaissance prince. He was tall, skilled in hunting, jousting, and music, fluent in several languages. He embodied the very image of magnificent kingship. But beneath this glittering surface, a deep and troubling anxiety gnawed at the king and at his kingdom. Henry had a queen, Catherine of Aragon, but after years of marriage, they had only one living child, a daughter, Mary. He had no male heir. In a world where the line of succession was everything, this was not just a personal disappointment, it was a crisis of dynastic survival. The memory of the bloody civil wars of the previous century, the Wars of the Roses, was still fresh. A disputed succession could tear the kingdom apart once more. This problem, his desperate need for an annulment of his marriage so he could wed another and sire a son, became known as the king's great matter. It would consume him, and it would ultimately reshape the nation's faith and destiny. But while this great political and religious storm was brewing, the daily life of the court had to continue. In fact, it had to become more spectacular than ever. The king needed to project an image of unassailable power and confidence to his people and to the ambassadors of foreign courts who watched his every move. And the primary stage for this performance of power was the royal feast. Imagine yourself now, not in a field, but in the great hall of a royal palace, perhaps at Greenwich, overlooking the River Thames. The sheer scale is staggering. The room is vast. With a high, vaulted ceiling of carved oak, the stone walls, cold to the touch, are covered in enormous, richly colored tapestries depicting heroic battles or biblical scenes. They are not just for decoration, they are a vital defense against the drafts that sweep through these massive buildings. Two enormous fireplaces roar at either end of the hall, each large enough for a man to stand in. They consume whole logs with a ferocious appetite, casting a warm, flickering light that dances with the glow of hundreds upon hundreds of beeswax candles, whose sweet, honeyed scent is a luxury in itself. The long trestle tables are arranged in a U shape, draped in fine, white linen, so pristine it seems to capture the light. At the head table, on a raised platform, sits the king. His plate and goblet are not of wood or pewter, but of gleaming, polished silver, perhaps even gold. Around him are the most important guests, foreign ambassadors, powerful dukes, and trusted advisors. The further you are seated from the king, the lower your status. Your very survival at court can depend on how close you sit to the royal son. The meal does not simply appear. Its arrival is a ceremony. A trumpet sounds, a clear, piercing note that cuts through the murmur of conversation. The great doors swing open, and a procession begins. Dozens of servants in the king's livery carry in the first course. The dishes are held high, a river of platters flowing into the hall. The food itself is a world away from the peasant's pottage. It is a spectacle of abundance, a deliberate defiance of scarcity. There are no simmering cauldrons of gray stew here. Instead, there are roasted swans and peacocks, their flesh cooked to perfection, then painstakingly redressed in their own feathers to appear as if they were still alive. There are whole roasted boars and deer, the prizes of the royal hunt, their mouths stuffed with apples. There are dozens of smaller birds, partridge, quail, woodcock, and lark, served in great piles, and the smell, where the peasant's hut smelled of earth and boiling cabbage, this hall is thick with a heady, intoxicating perfume. It is the smell of roasting meat, of wood smoke, and something else, something far more exotic, spices. The food is laden with flavors that the common person would never even imagine. Cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from the Moluccas, nutmeg from the Banda Islands, ginger from India, and mountains of black pepper. These spices were worth more than their weight in gold, brought across the world through a perilous and expensive trade. To use them so liberally was the ultimate statement of wealth. It was like eating money. In the center of the high table sits a marvel, a work of art known as a subtlety. It is a fantastical sculpture, molded entirely from sugar paste and marzipan. Tonight, it might be a castle with pennants flying, or a knight slaying a dragon, or a scene that subtly hints at the king's own greatness and virility, a silent, edible piece of political propaganda. Even the simplest things are elevated. The bread is not the coarse, dark loaf of the peasant. It is called manchet, a small white loaf made from the finest wheat flour, sifted multiple times until it is as pure and pale as snow. The drink is not the watery, small beer. It is fine wine, red and white, imported from the vineyards of Gascony and Burgundy, flowing freely and endlessly. But even in this paradise of plenty, there is a bitter taste. For the courtier, survival means navigating the intricate politics of the table. To be offered a piece of meat from the king's own plate is a sign of immense favor. To be ignored is a terrifying omen. Every word is weighed, every glance interpreted. The pressure to perform, to be witty, to be graceful, is immense. And there is a more literal fear, the fear of poison. The king's food and drink are first tasted by a trusted servant whose job it is to risk death with every meal. It is a reminder that in this world of power, a smiling face could hide the deadliest of intentions. There is also a slower, more insidious danger in this diet of excess. While the poor worried about the hungry gap, the wealthy suffered from the consequences of their own indulgence. The incredibly rich, meat-heavy diet, with its lack of fiber and vegetables as we know them, led to a host of painful ailments. Gout, a tormenting inflammation of the joints, was rampant among the aristocracy. The king himself, in his later years, would become famously, morbidly obese. His athletic youth a distant memory, his body racked with painful sores and ailments likely exacerbated, if not caused, by his gluttonous diet. The bitter taste for the rich was not the sting of hunger, but the slow, inexorable decay brought on by a lifetime of feasting. So we leave the great hall, the trumpets heralding yet another course, the spices hanging heavy in the air. This entire display, this mountain of food and river of wine, is a projection of Henry's unshakable authority. It is a feast of defiance, yet it is all tinged with the bitter irony of his great matter. He was the king. He could command the rarest spices, the greatest hunts, the most elaborate subtleties. He could change the very faith of his country, but he could not command nature to give him a son. And that single, simple failure of biology made all this spectacular, overwhelming abundance feel, in the end, profoundly empty. The world of high ceremony and political theater was built upon a complex foundation of belief, tradition, and law. But beneath the surface of this structured society, there were always mysteries, unanswered questions buried in the earth, forgotten texts waiting to be rediscovered, and strange plagues that defied the logic of both peasant and king. Chapter 3. The Spectre of St. Anthony's Fire. We have seen the world of the peasant, defined by scarcity, and the world of the king, defined by excess. But there were dangers that transcended class, threats that could not be solved with power or wealth. These were the mysteries that haunted the medieval mind, dangers that seemed to spring not from the earth, but from the supernatural realm of saints and demons. Let us now turn our attention to one such mystery, a terrifying, phantom affliction that would appear without warning, sweeping through a village or a region and leaving devastation in its wake. It was a malady of two faces, each more frightening than the last. In some, it began with a tingling in the fingers and toes, a strange numbness that would soon give way to uncontrollable twitching. Muscles would contract into painful, spasming knots. The body would contort into unnatural positions, and the mind would be besieged by vivid, terrifying hallucinations. To the sufferer and to those who watched in horror, it seemed a clear case of demonic possession. They were fighting a battle with an invisible evil, but it was the second form of the illness that gave it its most common name, St. Anthony's fire. It, too, would begin in the extremities, in a hand or a foot, but it was not a spasm. It was a sensation of intense, all-consuming heat. It was described as a fire that burned from within the body, an agonizing feeling that your very blood was boiling. The afflicted limb would begin to swell and darken, turning a deep, morbid purple, and then black. It became cold, numb, and dry. Then, the true horror would reveal itself. The blackened fingers, toes, or even an entire hand or foot would simply separate from the body. It would fall away, mummified and brittle, often with no blood and little pain at the final moment of separation. The fire had simply consumed it. To the people of the Middle Ages, this was a terrifying and baffling scourge. They had no concept of germs, no understanding of toxicology. This could only be the work of God or the devil, an expression of divine wrath for some hidden sin, or a direct assault by the forces of darkness. Communities would turn to desperate prayer, making pilgrimages to shrines dedicated to Saint Anthony, the patron saint believed to offer protection from this fiery torment. They prayed for a miraculous cure that rarely came. The cause of this suffering, the agent of this mysterious fire, was not a demon. It was not a divine punishment. The culprit was hidden in the most mundane, most essential item on the medieval table. It was in their daily bread. Let us go back to the peasant's field, to the swaying stalks of rye that we spoke of earlier. Rye was a hardy grain, able to grow in poor soil and damp conditions where wheat might fail. It was the bedrock of the peasant diet, but under certain conditions, usually a cold winter, followed by a particularly wet and rainy spring, a fungus could take hold on the maturing grains. The fungus is called Claviceps purpurea, more commonly known as ergot. It appears as a dark, purplish-black growth, hard and horn-like, looking like a twisted spur emerging from the head of grain. When the rye was harvested, these toxic growths would be gathered along with the healthy grains. In the dim light of a medieval mill, they were impossible to separate. They were ground down along with the rest of the rye, a poison silently mixed into the flour. The family baker, the village wife, would have no idea. The flour looked normal. The dough felt normal. The bread, when it came out of the oven, looked like any other dark, dense loaf of rye bread. But it was contaminated with powerful alkaloids, chemicals that, when consumed, would wreak havoc on the human body. These alkaloids would constrict the blood vessels, cutting off the flow of blood to the extremities. This is what caused the gangrene, the feeling of fire, followed by the slow, inexorable death of the limb. The same chemicals would also attack the central nervous system, producing the terrifying convulsions, spasms, and vivid hallucinations. The very thing the peasant family relied on for their survival could become the instrument of their torment. And the wetter the year, the poorer the harvest, the more desperate the people were. They would eat every last grain, making the chances of consuming the poison even higher. The bitter taste of their struggle was, in this case, terrifyingly literal. Today, we can piece this mystery together through the quiet work of science and archaeology. In medieval graveyards, archaeologists have found skeletal remains that tell a silent story. Mass graves, where the victims of a sudden outbreak were buried together, show bodies with no evidence of violence, no sword cuts or arrow wounds. They are simply the victims of an invisible killer. Modern science can even find clues in the most intimate of places. Preserved human waste, known to archaeologists as coprolites, can be analyzed, and in samples taken from medieval sites, scientists have found the chemical signature of ergot alkaloids, a direct, microscopic link between the ancient fungus and its victims. The story is also told in the art and writings of the time. Monastic chronicles dutifully record the years of the great plagues of St. Anthony's fire, describing the symptoms with a chilling clarity. In paintings and woodcuts, we can see the sufferers. Artists depicted them with contorted limbs, their hands and feet blackened, praying before a serene St. Anthony for a relief that would not come from the heavens, but eventually from a better understanding of agriculture. It is a chilling thought to consider the wider cultural impact of this hidden poison. Consider the social terror in a village where a dozen people suddenly begin to convulse, to scream of visions, to accuse their neighbors. The symptoms of convulsive ergotism are strikingly similar to the behaviors described in the accounts of those bewitched during the witch hunts that would stain later centuries. We cannot know for certain, but it is a deeply unsettling possibility that some of the accusations, the trials, the tragic executions for witchcraft may have had their roots not in malice or satanic pacts, but in the desperate hallucinations of a community slowly being poisoned by their own bread. The mystery of St. Anthony's fire is, for us, solved, but it is a profound reminder of the terrifying vulnerability of the medieval world. It was a world where the lines between the natural and the supernatural were blurred, and where danger could hide in the most trusted and familiar of places. The bitter taste was the taste of fear, the fear of a world filled with powerful and unknowable forces, where even your daily bread held the power to destroy you. This constant, underlying struggle, this deep uncertainty about the world, existed at all levels of society. While the peasant feared a fungus in their rye, the nobility engaged in their own complex rituals of survival, creating a world of stark and often beautiful contrasts governed by rules we can now only begin to decipher. Chapter 4: The Monasteries' Silent Meal. We have walked in a world of fear and mystery, where the daily bread could be a source of poison and the supernatural felt unnervingly close. Let us now retreat from that chaos and uncertainty and seek sanctuary in a place designed for the very opposite, a place of absolute order, routine, and quiet contemplation. Let us enter a medieval monastery. Imagine an island of serene industry in the often turbulent sea of the medieval landscape. It is a world enclosed by high stone walls, not for defense, but to separate the sacred from the secular. Inside, Life moves not to the rhythm of the seasons, but to the chiming of a bell, which calls the inhabitants to their duties with unwavering precision. This is the world of the monk. Their lives are governed by a single, powerful text, the rule of Saint Benedict, written centuries earlier. And this rule has much to say about food. For a monk, eating was not a social event, nor was it a source of pleasure. It was a necessity, but also a spiritual danger. The sin of gluttony was a constant temptation, a door through which the devil could enter a man's soul. Food was simply fuel. It was the means by which the body could be sustained to perform its true purpose, prayer and work, ora et labora. So, while the peasant endured hunger out of necessity, the monk embraced it as a spiritual discipline. They fasted often, deliberately creating a controlled, internal, hungry gap to purify the body and humble the spirit. This was a world where less was truly more. Let us join the monks for their main meal of the day. We enter the refectory, their great dining hall. The architecture is simple, echoing the design of a church, with high ceilings and tall windows that let in a soft, holy light. The tables are long, wooden, and bare, but scrubbed clean. There is an immediate, palpable sense of peace here. But what is most striking, most different from the peasant's hut or the king's hall, is the profound and pervasive silence. The monks file in, their woolen robes making a soft shushing sound on the stone floor. They take their places, their movements practiced and economical. No one speaks. A meal here is not a time for idle chatter, which was seen as a form of vanity. It is a time for nourishment of the body and of the soul. As they begin to eat, another sound fills the hall. From a raised pulpit or lectern set into the wall, a single monk, the lector for the week, begins to read. His voice is a steady, calm monotone. He reads from the Holy Scriptures or from the life of a saint. His voice is the only sound, weaving through the silence as the other monks eat. The meal itself becomes an act of meditation, a time to listen and reflect, and the food on their wooden trenchers or in their simple ceramic bowls, it is a study in calculated restraint. The rule of Saint Benedict strictly forbade the monks from eating the meat of any four-legged animal, unless they were gravely ill. So, while the king's table overflowed with roasted venison and boar, the monastery refectory saw none of it. Their primary source of protein came from the water. Monasteries became masters of aquaculture, engineering, and maintaining complex systems of fish ponds. Here they raised carp, bream, pike, and eels with a scientific precision that was far ahead of its time. Their fish ponds were a symbol of their self-sufficiency and their orderly approach to the natural world. Like the peasant, the monks also ate pottage, but it was a pottage born of organization, not desperation. The vegetables, the leeks, onions, and beans, came from their own meticulously kept gardens. These gardens were not just for food. Their herb gardens, or physics gardens, were sources of medicine for both the monastery and the surrounding community. And they, too, had their bread and ale. But here, the craft was perfected. Monks were among the finest brewers and bakers of the age. They produced different qualities of bread and different strengths of ale, not for profit, but for the orderly running of their community. A finer loaf for a feast day, a stronger ale for a visiting dignitary, a simple loaf and weak ale for a normal day of work. This points to a great paradox. While the individual monks practiced a life of denial, the monastery as an institution was often an economic powerhouse. They were major landowners, managing vast agricultural estates far more efficiently than most secular lords. They had enormous stone barns and granaries, protecting them from the famines and hungry gaps that so terrified their tenants. This wealth allowed them to be centers of charity, distributing a daily dole of bread or ale to the poor who would gather at their gates. Their spiritual survival was, ironically, built upon a foundation of profound worldly success. And so, what was the bitter taste in this world of serene order? It was the taste of constant, willful self-denial. Imagine the daily, internal struggle, the human, natural desire for a little more flavor, for a larger portion, for the pleasure of a fine meal, had to be consciously and perpetually suppressed. The monotony of the diet, the endless silence of the refectory, the unceasing routine. For some, this was a path to enlightenment and peace. But for others, it must have been a quiet, lifelong torment, a battle waged within the soul against the simplest of human appetites. We have now visited three very different tables in the medieval world. We have sat in the peasant's hut, sharing a meager pottage born of a struggle for physical survival. We have witnessed the king's feast, a spectacle of excess designed for political survival. And we have sat in the monastery's refectory, where a simple, silent meal was part of the unending quest for spiritual survival. Each table had its own bitter taste, the taste of scarcity, the taste of excess, and the taste of denial. These scattered scenes, the smoky hut, the glittering hall, the silent refectory, are but faint echoes of a lost world, a world of hardship and spectacle, of faith and fear. And as we leave the monks to their silent meal, we can begin our own gentle drift back to the present, back to the comfort and quiet of our own time, carrying with us just a hint of their forgotten tastes. And so, our journey through the tastes of the past comes to a close. We have lingered in the smoke of the peasant's hut and felt the phantom warmth of a pottage that simmered for a lifetime. We have stood in the shadow of a king's great feast, where the scent of exotic spices was a declaration of power. We have felt the chill of a mysterious, unseen poison hidden within a simple loaf of bread, and we have sat in the profound silence of the monastery, where denying hunger was a form of prayer. The bitter taste of medieval survival was a complex flavor. It was the bitterness of rye and barley, of scarcity and struggle, but it was also the bitterness of a life lived with constant uncertainty, a world where survival, whether of the body, of a dynasty, or of the soul, was a task that was never truly finished. The world we have been visiting is now centuries in the past. It exists only in the quiet pages of books, in the silent artifacts under the earth, and in the faint echoes we have conjured here tonight. Let those echoes now begin to fade. Let the clamor of the great hall and the quiet murmur of the lector's prayer recede. They belong to another time, another world. Gently bring your awareness back to the here and now, to the simple, profound comfort of your surroundings, the softness of your pillow, the weight of your blanket, the quiet, steady hum of the modern world outside your window, a world of refrigerators that keep food fresh, of clean water that flows from a tap of pantries, filled with a variety we could scarcely have described to the people we met tonight. The fears that shaped their lives are not yours. The hungry gap will not come. Your daily bread holds no hidden fire. There are no fields to tend at dawn. There are no political games to be played at the king's table. There are no bells calling you to prayer. There is only the quiet of this room, the safety and the stillness. There is nothing left for you to do, nothing to solve, nothing to consider. You have listened to the story, and now it is time for rest. Allow the last remnants of the past to dissolve into the darkness, and give yourself permission to let go completely. Let your mind drift on the gentle music into a deep and truly peaceful sleep. Rest well, and we hope to see you again